I'm Lauren Herman. I work with the middle schools within STARS, our company that Lauren will kind of introduce.
Sure. So I'm Lauren Dixon. I'm the Director of Clinical Services for STARS, and I oversee all of our programming in Williamson County.
And I'm Emily Wright. I work with our high schools in Williamson County as an enhanced student assistance provider.
And tell us a little bit about what STARS is.
STARS is a nonprofit that works with youth and families. We are very committed to supporting health, hope, and connection for all the young people that we serve. And in Williamson County, we are in the schools, in middle and high schools. We place a master's level counselor in each middle and high school in order to supplement the school counseling departments and provide a person who's available to students in responding to whatever needs they might have in the course of the school day or week.
How long have you been in the school system here?
Decades at this point. Yes.
Oh,
yeah, quite some time.
Okay, and then what services do you provide to the schools?
Yeah, so as counselors in the schools, we do three main things. One is that we are there to respond to any crisis that might arise during the day. Sometimes those are significant crises. We might hear a student report suicidal ideation or some kind of self-harming behavior, and so those are significant issues. It could be that a student is really distraught and crying and nobody knows why, and so our counselor might be the first person just to meet with them and help them gather themselves and figure out what's happening so that we could choose an appropriate course of action. So that's sort of one level of service. We also provide ongoing individual and group counseling support for students and families who choose that. That is to develop skills, basically, to manage the stressors that the students might experience in the course of the day. That might relate to anxiety management. There may be experiences of grief or loss. They may have the need for some more social skills development. Anything that might be interfering with a young person's ability to go through their school day successfully. Our goal is to help them gain the skills they need to feel well, and then to re-enter school and get back into class and thrive. And then we also work with student leaders and faculty and administration to do school-wide campaigns related to promoting health and wellness. And that might include bullying prevention or substance abuse prevention or suicide prevention. We do a lot of distracted driving prevention at the high school level. So there's a realm of things we might address, and it's really up to the students and faculty of the school to help us determine what the needs are and what we might do to respond.
In my experience, when there is a kid in crises, you guys kind of go beyond this just being what's happening in the school. Is that correct?
Absolutely. If there is a crisis and it requires a more significant intervention, our first connection is with the parents and or the guardians to establish a course of action, and we'll work with other school personnel, including school counselors or school social workers, administrators, to make sure that we're connecting to resources in the community, that families and students have what they need to be healthy and well.
So if someone were trying to find information that for services you provide as a parent who didn't know, how would they go about that for their kid in school?
Great. Well, they could go to our website, which is starsnashville.org, and all of our programs are listed there. My contact information is there. Anybody's welcome to call me directly. They could also call their schools and request to speak to their STARS counselor, and they'll be connected to the STARS counselor at their school.
All right. So Lauren and Emily, since you're in with the schools, what does mental health mean to you? Go with Lauren.
Sure. So a lot of what Lauren was talking about is kind of that kind of intervention and then prevention aspect of working with students. So at the middle school level, I see a lot of that first transition into like, how am I becoming more of an adult? So coming from the elementary level to middle school, a lot of times that's a big transition for students. And so I see a lot of anxiety in the middle school level, a lot of kind of peer conflicts and, kind of interpersonal skills, kind of building that. But then a lot of my job is also the prevention aspect of things, of helping to raise awareness, and then also work with faculty on what are the warning signs that a student might be struggling, and kind of what to do with that.
Yeah, I would say on the high school level, a lot of mental health and well-being for them is advocacy and knowing how to ask for help and where to find it, so within the school and beyond. And also just kind of this internal sense of knowing that they do possess the skills and strengths they need to succeed, and it's just our job to come alongside them, help shift some of that out of the way, and kind of remove some of those barriers so they do feel equipped to handle whatever may be coming their way at any given day or time.
Okay, this series is meant to provide information specifically to parents. Is there a difference in what you see with the mental health wise between middle school and high school?
You want to take this one?
Sure. I think over time the acuity and the range of all of our students' needs has increased just as media has progressed and younger kids needing and knowing that they need more help earlier. So I don't know problem specific if there's a huge variety of need, but we get to work with middle and high schoolers across the board. So I think it's helpful to be with younger kids as well, because it's not just the older you get, the more problems you have. So I think we do a good job of addressing kind of the need widespread in our county.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so a basic day in school, we can start in middle school. What does that look like, and what issues are most common, and how are they traditionally addressed?
Sure. So a lot of my day, I have some students that are scheduled, so that maybe they were referred to me from the school counselor, or a parent had reached out to me. And so I might have a scheduled meeting with a student during their enrichment time, or their time when they don't have an academic class. And so the other part of my day is also built into just students that are kind of just popping in, that maybe they had contact with me and their friend is struggling. So a lot of times it can be peer referrals. I also get referrals from teachers. So if there's a student who's just, broken down in the classroom and they're crying in the back, and the teacher doesn't know what to do, I might get a call or an email, and I'll go and I'll kind of talk to the student and try to help kind of figure out what the struggle is. So a lot of my day is kind of just seeing what kind of happens. So kind of just on the seat of the edge of my chair with that one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's kind of just whoever needs help. And I think a large part of our job is making sure students do know that we're there. And so we kind of get the word out, make sure other personnel know where we're located and how we can help, and kind of what we work with. So that's really not limited to much. So we get kids coming in for any reasons, kind of like Lauren was saying, struggling from just a rough night, or friends in the morning, or class struggles and school struggles, anything that they're kind of wondering about or thinking of. If it results in kind of this emotional breakdown or barrier, they kind of find their way to us either by another adult kind of taking notice and caring, or already having a relationship built with us where they feel like they can come fill us in and get some help.
And there's also times that we provide groups. So I do group counseling sessions. Sometimes it's related on social skills building and kind of friendship building, and kind of how do I form that connection in middle school. I also do some groups around like grief and loss, or kind of just change of family dynamics. So our week can kind of can consist of that as well.
Okay, how much do you think mental health plays a role in a student's success?
Greatly.
Yeah, I think we think it's central. I think if, in order to learn and succeed and grow academically at school, any of us need to feel grounded and connected and safe and secure in our, our sense of ourselves as being people of value with dignity, and any kind of mental health obstacle or barrier can really interfere with just that general sense of well-being, and so all of that can impede the ability to be open to academic learning and success.
Do you feel like that you get a barrier from people like that don't want to look at mental health as a reason for a kid's success?
Less so now. I think it's really, I think that we as a community, as a society, have come a really long way in acknowledging that things are really challenging, for young people and for older people. And that in order to thrive in life, we really need to attend to our mental health and our wellness. And I think that there's an increased understanding now that is just an essential component to success.
Do you think there's still a lot more work to be done on that
And
front?
I'm sure there's always work that could be done. I know that if it's something that people are unfamiliar with, it can be. It can feel scary. There could, traditionally there's been stigma attached, but I really do think that we've made a lot of strides in that area. Part of when Lauren and Emily were talking about a typical day, something I feel really proud of is how the relationships that our counselors form with the faculty and the administrators and the students, so that when there is an issue, the faculty know to bring it to the STARS counselor. Friends of the student will come to the STARS counselor and say, hey, I heard my friend saying this, I'm really worried. And so it really, I think, enhances our ability to respond to student needs when we have that strong relationship, and that there's that education around how important it is to take things that people say seriously.
Do you do a lot of education with the teachers prior to like the start of school or throughout the school year?
Sure, yeah, we do professional developments with teachers during faculty meetings, during PDs before the start of the school, kind of ongoing throughout. I think there's a lot of collaboration and communication on topics related to mental health and well-being. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think just because STARS has been in the schools for a long time, there's kind of this community built that teachers know that what the STARS counselor does. And then when there are new teachers, oftentimes I reach out to the new teachers to kind of introduce myself as well. But teachers also collaborate and figure out, okay, I'm struggling with this student. Oh, have you talked to, Lauren, the STARS counselor? I see a lot of that happening at the school as well.
So one of the things you talked about was how a lot of time their home life or what's going on at home, they bring that to school. Do you find that school can sometimes affect mental health, even if the home life is fine?
Yeah, I think a lot of our kids who may have sailed through yet their younger years or have all the resources at home to help them with school eventually can hit a point where school may start to get challenging, and that's new for them. And so kind of creating this coming alongside and championing them to overcome school when it hasn't been a barrier is a lot of our work, and kind of helping them with even just organizational skills and habits, and kind of managing that stress around school is a lifelong skill that I think all of our kids can benefit from.
And I think students naturally try to compare themselves to one another, and I think that creates a lot of pressure and competition at times. And so I think that can create this kind of internalized kind of anxiety about, okay, I'm not doing as well as this person over here. How can I do better? Or what's wrong with me that I'm not doing better? There's a lot of that kind of can go on too.
Do you think that's more in the middle school than the high school, or is it pretty evenly across the both?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty widespread. I think all of our kids want to do well. I think they want to succeed. They're in a really challenging, competitive place in their education, and I think that can kind of rub off on them sometimes, for sure.
Do you think being in Williamson County in a more affluent community puts that added pressure on those kids, as opposed to people who are struggling with basic needs here? A lot of that's, they have a lot of that.
I think there's, depending on the community, there's different kinds of needs. It's hard to kind of say, I think struggling with very basic needs is, obviously a very prime struggle, and, requires urgent response. In a more affluent community, first of all, Williamson County, it's not universally affluent. And, I think I think it's kind of hard to say. I think, some kids thrive. I think some kids hit some points where they struggle, and it doesn't mean that they're kind of doomed to struggle, but that I think just recognizing that all students are different. We all have different risk factors and protective factors. Part of that is kind of our own makeup. Part of that might be kind of what's surrounding us, in our homes and communities. It could, trauma plays a huge factor in that, and that certainly goes beyond, wealth or socioeconomic status. We're all impacted by that. And so just accepting that, all of our students are going to present at different times in their lives with different needs, and having a flexible response and enough resources to respond effectively and manage that, I think is the best that we can do. Yeah.
Have you noticed that mental health issues are becoming more predominant with the even younger age group than before?
It's hard to say. I mean, STARS has evolved in the schools. We really were in our initial work was much more prevention oriented. It was much more kind of that universal intervention, educating around different kinds of issues. And over time, the increased mental health focus, I think, does correspond with an increased mental health need. Whether that's starting at earlier ages, I'm not sure, but overall, I would say, there are a lot of mental health needs. I think it's certainly compounded by our current pandemic and how that's impacted families and schools and all of us. And so it is something that it seems to be increasing, and maybe it's that there's just increased awareness about it, and so now we have increased supports in place.
Would you say that anxiety and depression may be the most common thing that you see among your students in the schools? And what can that look like if you're a parent not knowing?
Mm-hmm. A lot of different things, and that's what kind of makes it hard to identify. If I am working with a student who might be having behavior problems in the classroom, some of that could actually be stemming from like underlying anxiety or underlying depression issues. And so a lot of times it's trying to figure out, okay, let's kind of peel apart part of those layers and see what is kind of causing a lot of this distress. And a lot of times I have noticed that behavior issues are kind of just like a side step away from anxiety.
Yeah, I would say school or social functioning, if that kind of changes for the better or for the worse. A lot of our kids have physical reactions to both of those things. So if you notice a student looking, more withdrawn or isolating more, if they're doing things that are quite different from their norm, that could be a good sign that something might be happening. But a lot of different ways that anxiety and depression are presenting in our students can just be the way that they're interacting with their peers, the way they're interacting with adults, and just kind of keeping an eye on what their, quote, normal functioning would be, and anything kind of that's out of that normal range.
And sometimes even there's somatic symptoms. So if they're going to the nurse a lot with stomach aches or going to the nurse a lot with headaches, a lot of times if there's a pattern, and it always happens to be maybe before a certain class, then sometimes that gives us ideas and cues of like, okay, maybe there's some more, something else that's going on here.
So interesting, you mentioned stomach aches. Like that would be something like a parent who knows that their kid's struggling in school but doesn't know why, and doesn't realize they have any of these underlying issues. But, are there other signs other than stomach aches that parents should be like, oh, I should keep an eye out?
Sure, yeah. I think any kind of behavior that just feels different. I think a lot of times parents and guardians know their child. And so if things just seem to have slowly shifted, or all of a sudden there's a big shift, then that's sometimes a warning sign. Changes in sleeping habits or eating habits, even friendship changes can be a big factor in that aspect of things. Grades, if they're all of a sudden not doing as well as they had been, sometimes those are signs. So it's hard because there can be so many reasons for those things. But sometimes just taking a step back and kind of looking at, all right, what are the little changes and what does it add into, can sometimes help us look at the bigger picture.
So what would you give advice to a parent who, okay, they've realized there's a couple things that they're going to keep an eye out. What would be the next steps for the parents, would you say?
Yeah, I would think contacting probably anyone at the school that they trust or have a relationship with, and that person hopefully can kind of point them in the right direction and kind of create like a wraparound support system. So we are one of many people, I think, for each of my students. We have kind of teams of support, so that can include our school social worker who can connect them to resources beyond the school, their school counselor who's going to keep an eye on them as they progress through all 4 years at the school, trusted teachers, coaches, things like that. So kind of incorporating these students' natural supports and trusted people in the building to kind of get together and see how they can best support the student with all the information the parent has to give as well.
Mm-hmm. And if a parent doesn't feel connected to any of those people, I mean, I would just say go with your STARS counselor, as a first point of contact, because I mean, that is what we're there for, mm-hmm. and we can make sure that we, any parent who contacted us about any kind of concern, we would absolutely follow up and do everything in our power to make sure that the parent had the resources that they need, that the student had the resources that they need, and to help facilitate those connections. And so even if it seemed like we needed to make a referral outside in the community, with their support, or to connect them to other people in the school, we're very happy to be an initial point of contact for any parent.
So what's the steps in once they think, oh, my kid has a problem, maybe I need to have someone have an eye out, mm-hmm. So what is your role in that once you get that initial call from a parent?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think typically I would check their schedule, find a good time that's kind of hopefully going to reduce academic stress, and usually just pull them in. And I like to really make them just feel heard and seen. So kind of just asking them a little bit about themselves first so they know they're not in trouble or anything like that. And just getting them really familiar and open and warm to a trusting adult who's just caring about them and checking in, and just seeing how they're feeling and how they're going about their day, and if there's anything that they want to be able to talk about or work through, or anything that they're needing a little extra help with, and kind of letting them know that, and then kind of assessing from there what the best course of action would be and who to pull in.
Mm-hmm. So if the student didn't express any kind of urgent need that needed from our perspective, like an immediate response, we would just explore, would it be okay if we checked in on you? Like maybe once a week, we would try to see if you'd be available to come in and talk. And if they were okay with that, then we could convey back to, the parent that we're, they expressed, kind of no urgent emergency kind of situation, but they'd, want to continue to check in with us. And then over time, it could take a little while to really get to know somebody and start to feel safe and trust in that relationship. And then, we'll have a better sense over time of, do we need to make a referral for more intensive therapy in the community? Our thing was it just kind of a little bit of a rough patch, but things seem to be resolved and they've worked through whatever issues they were struggling with. And so we make that initial contact and then can see from there kind of where to go.
And sometimes even just that little connection of just introducing yourself and meeting, even if it's that once, 2 months from now, if that student is like, I am struggling, or my friend is struggling, oh, I remember that meeting that I had, and they know of someone that they can connect to. So a lot of our, work is making that connection just for those instances.
Do you see a lot of anxiety attacks at school? And what do those look like?
Yeah, ours usually land them in the nurse's office, kind of like we were talking about before. So a lot of physical symptoms, our body is really smart in telling us that something might be going awry. So usually for us, it looks like a call from the nurse saying, we've got a student here who is just needing some kind of self-soothing and regulation skills. And that can kind of just be running through with that student, what was happening before, what they've been noticing, have they ever experienced this before, what typically helps them, and kind of running through some different alternatives to help them kind of slow down their breath, slow down their body, and soothe kind of whatever thoughts might be running through their brain as well. But just giving them kind of a calm, safe space to process through that, and kind of take the stress cycle and kind of get through it.
So if a kid is like overwhelmed in school in a class, like gets to a point, maybe it's not an anxiety attack per se, what should they, like if their kid's coming home and saying, I had a real hard time, I didn't know what to do, where to go, what would you tell them?
A lot of times if they feel comfortable asking the teacher, a lot of the times the teachers are very comfortable just saying, hey, go see, Miss Herman, or, go see whoever it might be. And then I will, write a note and make sure that they are getting caught up on, if it's an academic time, making sure that they get that piece covered. But if they're comfortable talking to it, the teacher, a lot of times asking them to come see me is a helpful thing. Other times, if a teacher kind of notices that a student's in distress, they might just go ahead and message me, and I might go in and just as discreetly as possible, kind of get the student to come with me.
And that's on the middle school level. I think that the teachers have a more active role in facilitating that. And I think teachers now in general are aware if somebody is shaking or breathing heavily or sweating, or there's some kind of outward sign of distress, I mean, they would send that student to the counseling department or the nurse, most likely. And then on the high school level, the students have a little bit more autonomy, I guess, and would just know to walk to the counseling department. So that's what we would recommend. Certainly, if a student didn't know what to do, they would just request, either can I go to the nurse if they don't want to disclose where they're going, or, can I go to the counseling department? And then if it's a kind of ongoing thing, then kind of plans could be put in place to, make sure that happens as easily and smoothly as possible and before it escalates to a 10, and that we would work with students too on ultimately, identifying what are the warning signs, in their body physically that they notice, what are potential triggers, and what are kind of early intervention strategies that they can employ so that it doesn't become, a full-blown anxiety attack.
So you've talked about group work that you do within the schools with peers, and then you've talked about friends who come. So there's been a lot of research and there's a lot of good results from peer-to-peer support. How do you promote that within the schools?
I think just promoting general empathy. A lot of my students have come to me wanting our little leadership club to actually take on more of a mental health awareness piece. So just making sure that students they're kind of, I think, wanting spaces to be more compassionate with themselves and each other, to make mental health, again, kind of destigmatizing as has happened over time. So just kind of, again, it's the more warm and compassionate we can be with each other as adults and with the students, I think we kind of create that culture that this is something that's important, and it's important to kind of watch out for your friends and just make sure that they know that you're there for them.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
I know at my school it's also kind of a prevention piece that I work with the other counselors kind of as part of the team. Especially with incoming new students, matching them up with peers and connecting them with people who are familiar with the school and just friendly faces, making sure that they have places to eat at lunch. Sometimes even the smallest things of making sure they know where to go in the hall so they're not feeling like they're wandering can feel helpful and help them connect to other people, in addition to the groups and the leadership club that we do as well.
And we do we do a fair amount related to suicide prevention, and one of our key messages there is that if you are worried about a friend, please tell an adult. And it could be that the friend says, please don't tell anybody, or I won't be your friend anymore if you tell anybody. But we really try to do a lot of education around how important it is if somebody is talking about trying to end their life, that is actually not a secret that they can keep, and that even if the person is mad in the moment, our belief is that at some point in the future they'll understand and actually even thank their friend for coming forward with that information. So on the one hand, there's a natural kind of support system that happens among peers, and they hold a lot of stuff, and our message is ultimately that's wonderful that you can support one another, and please, come to any adult who you trust when this stuff becomes too big, and it feels like there's potential danger and you really can't keep it to yourself.
So as a parent, the kid comes home and says, my friend is struggling. What is good advice a parent can give to their child to help another?
I think it depends on what they're saying. I think if it's an emergency, or if they're saying anything that all relates to suicidal ideation, or kind of thinking about life not being worth living anymore, or that they feel like a burden, and your child's sense is that they might actually be thinking about ending their life, that's an emergency call. So that if you know that child's parent, I would recommend as a parent that you call that child's parent. You could always call the principal of the school if you don't have any way to access that information, or a school counselor. So that's kind of an emergency response. And then if it's simply that they feel anxious in certain situations, and it's, something they're struggling with, but you don't think it's life-threatening, then it's a combination of, encouraging your child to provide as much love and support as possible, but also knowing it's not on them to solve this problem. And they may actually need to access mental health professional and additional support, that they can't be held responsible for the well-being of their friend, that what they can do as a friend is, love and support them and help them connect to the resources that they might need to succeed.
All right. So when you learn a child is struggling, and maybe at first it's something really easy, but then it grows and becomes more. At what point do you involve the parent into this? Like, where's the line where you we need to call the parents?
Yeah, so generally for us, if we're seeing a child on any consistent basis, we're going to send a consent form home, so our parents are kind of fully aware that, hey, we are checking in with your child on a pretty regular basis. And to protect kind of the space, we're going to keep most of this stuff kind of between me and your child. But if there's ever any safety issue if even an ounce of us is concerned that might be an issue, you will be included in that conversation with whoever else needs to be included, to make sure that this child feels safe actually in the building, but also when they return home as well.
Mm-hmm.
How has technology fueled mental health?
Ooh, how much time do you have?
Well, that might go back to, you asked earlier about, do we believe that it might be affecting, students at a younger age? And I think social media could be kind of a catalyst for that change and that shift, because I think, because there's more access to websites and social media apps and things like that, I think students can be exposed to that a lot sooner. And so I think a lot of times students want to feel connected to one another, and so they might be sharing videos and messages and things like that with one another that might not be helpful and effective towards mental health and that sort of thing. And so I think social media can have a big impact on that.
Just the level of drama that ensues from social media. I mean, I'm well in my 40s, so it wasn't part of it. You would have an interaction and that would be it. And maybe somebody would tell somebody, but there wasn't a video of it, and it wasn't, kind of spreading all kinds of statements about people. I believe that the more that parents can monitor social media use, especially in middle school, the better. When I started at STARS, I was a counselor in a middle school, and I will not forget the moment when a 6th grader came and said that she had lost her phone, and it was such a relief because now she could go outside and play after school, and she didn't have to be texting and responding and managing her friend network. And I just thought that was, so telling about where we are. So, my kids are still in elementary school. I haven't had to manage this as a parent yet, but I do believe that the longer we can hold off on engaging in social media, or the more parental oversight that we have over social media, particularly in the middle school level, the better.
Yeah, I would say, back to Lauren's point on comparison, I think it's a huge comparison driver for our kids to notice who's doing what with whom when. And I think it's just a different state. When I left high school, I had 4 hours with just my family, just to do homework, just to kind of debrief, de-stress. But these kids are on all the time, and they have access to one another all the time. And that in itself is super stressful for them. For a lot of them, it's overwhelming. And it brings a lot of emotions that maybe they're not quite equipped to handle, especially on their own. And so it's an overwhelming kind of place to live, to always have availability to one another at all times.
And I know especially at the middle school level, students don't always understand how to hold boundaries for themselves and kind of find that balance. So I might have students who stay up till 10, 11, 12 o'clock on their phone and then wonder why they can't stay awake for their first class period in the morning. Or they end up running late and then don't have breakfast. So I think a lot of basic needs then start to take a back seat, the amount of sleep and the amount that people eat. And that has a significant impact on mental health as well.
So one thing I heard about recently, and my kids are in high school, so thank goodness we're out of the middle school stage, but there's like all these Instagram pages where it's all bullying. And so how do you, and I forget what it's called, you probably know what it is, but because it's not school related. So how do you can't really police that. So how do you what do you do?
Yeah, I think I encourage my kids as much as they can, for as many times as they're willing, to kind of put it down. If they can pledge even with their friends to take 30-minute, hour-long breaks. And I think it is hard because, especially as adults, I feel quite removed from knowing about every site or every page. And so doing my own literacy in that way and knowing like what is out there, what is available, what are kids tapping into, I think is kind of important for us to do our due diligence and be able to understand what they might be getting into. But to encourage them to kind of hold those boundaries, know what they are kind of getting into. And then if they do see inappropriate things, that they can totally take that to a parent. And if it does happen during the school day, they can take it to their principals as well.
And I do see sometimes a lot of it does happen outside of school, but somehow it always makes its way back in by conversations in the hall or conversations in class. And so a lot of my side of things is helping to educate students on kind of, how they're showing up. How are they showing up to their peers? Kind of how are they representing themselves? And kind of looking at how does that impact the relationships that they have. Because a lot of, in middle school, trying to figure out your identity and kind of where you fit in the world is a lot of that. There's trial and error there. And so we process, okay, if that didn't seem to work, what could we try again next time? That sort of thing.
What advice would you give these parents when they're parenting this sort of social media stuff, whether they're on the receiving end or the giving end? Because there's both those parents out there trying to teach their kids correctly.
I would say to be in very regular communication with their children about what's happening. I would also very much support apps that allow parents to monitor what's happening on their children's phone. I don't actually think that kids in middle school have the skills or maturity to navigate all of that on their own, and I think it requires teaching, and what Lauren was talking about, and just bringing it back to who are we as individuals, who are we as a family, what are our values, what's important to us, how do we respect ourselves, how do we respect other people, what are our limits, when are we going to cut things off. So it's a combination of teaching and also I believe in a lot of limit setting on the parents' end about kind of what kids can and can't do, only because again they don't have the capacity really at that age and that stage of development to navigate all of that safely, and it can be really damaging. And so we just want to, just like we want to protect our kids from all kinds of dangers that are out there, they're right there on the phone, if we're not kind of monitoring it carefully.
I think that's a great point about the teaching them, because maybe that's something, because all of us are kind of parents, at least I am, we, like you were saying, we didn't have that sort of technology, so we're learning too.
Yeah.
And we always, I think as parents, we feel like we're 3 steps behind what the kids are doing, trying to catch up.
Yeah. And
teaching them how to be good stewards on social media. I think that's a great place to start. I mean, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there's also so this idea of teaching, it also just reminded me of discipline, like the idea of discipline in general, comes from the word to teach. And so that when we are giving consequences or imposing, kind of clear limits on behavior, that it's not negative, it's not harsh, that it's, intended to teach, this is this is the behavior that we're going to practice and that we believe in and that we believe leads to success. And then, these are the consequences if we don't do those things. And the reason why is because we care about you and your safety and health is, more important than anything on the planet. But there's a framing that I do think is important for us all to remember.
I think as parents, though, when you're doing this, you have a hard time. Right? You want to limit, I think most parents want to limit this, but then there's this, we kind of feel like maybe it's a mental health thing. You take this away and they, there's tantrums that you have to deal with, or you feel like your kids they're not a part of their social group.
Yes. So it is not easy. I think that's so anything that any of us say, everybody struggles with all of these things, and that is true. And it is hard to know, and that's why I think consulting with friends, consulting with other parents, consulting with counselors, consulting with mental health professionals, if it's at that level, can be really helpful, because sometimes there's pushback, and that's to be expected. If you set a limit, there can be pushback, and that could not be fun to have to weather. And so it's important to get support and help, and like making prudent decisions. It doesn't seem like the right thing to do, and even if they're very unhappy about it, is it ultimately in their best interest? And how do I determine that? It's not easy, this whole parenting adventure, and that is for sure. I've had some very challenging jobs in my life, and I would say that parenting is at the top of that list. So yes.
How much of the juuling, the drugs, alcohol is attributed to a kid's mental health?
Tremendously. I mean, it physically changes the makeup of the brain. It changes kind of how neurons are firing off, and a lot of times, especially with nicotine, the impact of the brain is tremendous, because the brain doesn't fully develop until we're 25, and so the idea of someone who might already be struggling to focus in class, the nicotine kind of sends that off in a whole different direction, and so things that we need in order to succeed in the classroom are very much inhibited by drugs and alcohol.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a huge social component as well of, well, I only do it because my friends do it, or there's this kind of missing out piece, kind of the connection piece, as you were just talking about with media as well. So just kind of, again, facilitating ways for these students to find, what their meaning and their purpose is outside of these things, and helping them facilitate connection that is not solely based upon kind of these less helpful influences and things that are not going to help promote their growth and their health and their connection.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes, if people really are struggling with symptoms of anxiety or depression, they might think that using a drug alleviates those symptoms, and maybe kind of in a short term they do experience some sort of relief, but ultimately it's really destructive on their health, and it's not sustainable, and it's not legal, and it's, can be exceptionally dangerous, and it impacts relationships and school performance and functioning. So there are other ways, so looking at substance use as a symptom of a larger problem, if that's part of what you were asking, yes, that is certainly part of it. And so how can we intervene and find some replacement behavior so that whatever it is that they're trying to get, from that substance use, that we can find something healthier and safer to use that addresses that instead.
You had mentioned earlier about how a lot of the mental health barriers have been broken down, but there's still a lot there. So what advice would you give kids, and what advice would you give parents, either or both, to how they can help break down the barriers?
I think we can normalize it by talking about it. A lot of my kids love to say, "Well, I don't have it as bad as so and so," or we just don't talk about it a lot. We're not giving it a lot of space. I think there's an immense amount of vulnerability when an adult is able to mention that they're struggling sometimes, or they're stressed out. I think kids gain a lot of perspective when we're pretty open and honest with them about how we all kind of hit those walls sometimes. And as parents, I think that's pretty tremendous as well when we're open and honest with our kids in that way. Not oversharing, of course, but just being human in that way and kind of sharing that human connection, I think goes a long way. And asking our kids how they're doing and really wanting to hear the answer, I think is life-changing for a lot of our students.
Mm-hmm. I think modeling it a lot as parents and trying to figure out, okay, I was struggling today, and kind of sharing that, like not oversharing it as you're mentioning, but being able to connect with the child and just have them realize that you are human as well, and that you can understand at that level as well, and connecting with people who understand, because there are people out there that understand, even if there is sometimes a stigma still.
And I don't know. I think that the stigma isn't as strong among our young people. I don't know if you agree with that, but I think that it's much more common. It's much more understood that there are mental health struggles, and so I wonder just kind of generationally if our kids who are in school now don't necessarily hold the same level of stigma as maybe the older generation does.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. As I was listening to you talk, like, and knowing kids I've been around, they are much more open about it. But the parents are the ones that didn't know. Is there a history of mental health? Who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe. We never talked about it.
Yeah.
So maybe it's the parent, and I find that's true too. The more parents start talking about it, and very few do.
Yeah.
Even they don't want to say that their kids are struggling or anything. But then you say it to one person, you realize everyone is struggling with this.
Yes.
How can we be better as adults at making this a more, normal thing in our lives?
Yeah. I would encourage adults to discuss it in their, with their friends and their communities. And I think the more people do talk about it with the people who they trust, the more normal it will become. And I do actually think that, people would be surprised by how many other people are dealing with the same things that they are, and what a relief it is to connect. It's, isolation is just the worst. And so if you think that, your child is suffering and you're the only ones, and, what is it that I did wrong? It is so difficult to be a parent. And so it's so important to connect with support. And so hopefully people have that in their personal lives. They have, friends who they can turn to and be vulnerable and say, hey, this is going on. And then I'm sure they'll be surprised by how many people have been through similar situations. And if that seems too daunting, then again, reach out to your STARS counselor or anybody at your school who you feel comfortable with, because you will get a lot of support and understanding.
I think, too, that as parents, when our kids are struggling, we don't know it. We feel like we've failed as a parent.
Yes.
You kind of were touching on that before. And so but mental health, because your kid's suffering from mental health doesn't mean you're a bad parent.
No, it does not. Yes. And that is, that's why I said that there's nothing as hard as parenting, because we love our kids so much and we try so hard, and all of the sleepless nights, and just it is so difficult, and so it's so painful, when our students are struggling, when our kids are struggling, and just I think. Showing ourselves as parents the same love and kindness that we would show our kids is something that is really hard to do, and it's so important. And so I think giving ourselves that space to recognize that, hey, things aren't perfect, but it's not because I've done something dreadful. It's, this is how life goes, and, I need to support and take care of myself, and we will get through this, and I'm going to reach out to these people who care about me and let them help take care of me, and I'm going to access the support that I need and know that it's not that, I did something horribly wrong. It is overwhelming when your own kids are suffering, and so being able to find ways to take care of yourself and just know that you're not alone, and that so many of us have been in similar situations. And if we haven't been yet, one day we will be, and we just need to give each other that kind of love and support.
It's like the metaphor on an airplane where you put on your mask before your child's mask. being able to take care of yourself so that you can take care of them.
Yeah, I think some of the things we do with our students is to normalize and validate their experience. And I think that's important for parents to feel like their experience with their children is probably very normal and very valid, even if no one's speaking about it. I think it's worth that to know that other adults in the building are probably experiencing their child in the same way that they are.
So that's really, because you said you validate what they're dealing with is normal, and they should be feeling these things for the most part. A lot of these kids, right? They are all feeling these same feelings in one form or another. But as a parent who knows your kid is has mental health issues, what is some advice that you input as a professional that parents could say, oh, I will try that tool. I didn't think to do that, because here we are, we're trying to we want our kids to be happy. We want to implement the boundaries, but then you worry about rocking the boat. You're going to end up in this black hole again, and you're trying to avoid that too. So it's really difficult as a parent. So anything you incorporate that you could give a parent, advice you could give a parent?
I want to say one quick thing too. The parents are going to bear the biggest brunt of all of this stuff because kids feel safest with their parents. So if they're sitting with their counselor, it's going to look a little bit different because it's their counselor and it's not their parent. Their parent is their person who loves them the most in the world. And so if they break down a little bit more, let go a little bit more, that's to be expected. And so it's sort of the gift of being a parent is that you get to bear the brunt of all of this stuff. And just so knowing that is true. That being said, really being curious, really being open to listening. You don't have to have all the solutions all the time, but providing a space to make it clear that regardless of, how the child is or the young person is doing in the moment, that they are loved unconditionally, and we're going to be here together to get through what's happening. I think the key is that just acknowledging that we don't necessarily know the answers right now. We don't have to have all the answers. What we have is our unconditional love and commitment, and that actually goes a really long way.
So let's talk about what's going on right now, because I think as Lauren and I were talking, it's kind of catapulted mental health with the mass coronavirus, the staying at home, the uncertainty of what's going on, whether it's school or sports or any extracurriculars. Kind of give me your take on what's happening now.
I think anytime there's a time for change or a time for transition, there's going to be anxiety involved. And so that's kind of what 2020 has been, is just a bunch of change, a bunch of transition, and a bunch of uncertainty. So definitely a lot of anxiety as far as that goes. And then, we talk about connection. And so one of the unfortunate aspects of this pandemic is that isolating factor of when people have to go into quarantine, or, when we were remote, things like that, it takes away time for connection. And so I think a lot of times you can see symptoms of mental health pop up because there's not that opportunity for connection. So I know that, we try to do as much as we can, given some of the limitations, to facilitate that connection, because we know that anxiety is up and depression is up because of the fact that there's just so much uncertainty that's going on right now.
I think it's allowed us a lot of creativity and flexibility in how we reach one another, in how we're addressing what's going on in the greater community, and just kind of how we, again, like who we are as humans, how we're showing up for our friends and our families. And I think, honestly, I've been pretty impressed with our students. They're incredibly resilient, and they kind of have just taken it on and said, okay, this is our reality. This is what this year has brought us. And of course, there's some disappointment and frustration and things like that. But getting back in the schools and being in person has been extremely productive for them to see one another, just even eyeballs to eyeballs, and just getting to be connected again, I think has gone a long way for them. So as much as things are kind of uncertain and changing, I think I've seen a lot of our students be incredibly resilient against the change and wanting to learn those kind of flexible skills in this time.
So in my world, the report card, the first 9 weeks report cards came out, and I know across the board, a lot of kids are struggling with that. Why do you think that is?
I think it was really hard in the beginning when we were all working remotely. I think that was a huge adjustment. I think people have, as different schools have shut down, my understanding is things are kind of running more smoothly, and that students are able to make that transition a little more adeptly. But it was a tough start to the year, and it had to be the way that it was because of the reality of COVID-19. But I think coming off of last year when school shut down, and then the summer and re-entering, it makes sense that things wouldn't be running optimally, and that students wouldn't be able to just immediately spring back into kind of full academic mode. And so hopefully we'll find that as the year goes on, things will just get back to as normal as it can be these days.
So that's the end of my questions. But if there's any advice, you being in the schools, being in the director, that you would give parents to help them navigate all this, especially including parents that know they're dealing with it, and parents that don't know they're dealing with it, or what other extra advice would you give them?
Just not to be afraid to reach out. I think a lot of times we have this fear of the comparison and the judgment. What are people thinking about me? And if you're reaching out to a counselor, particularly STARS counselors, we love what we do. We chose this career. This is what we believe that we're meant to do. So we're here to help people.
Yeah, I think just being curious and open, and taking care of yourself, like Lauren was alluding to earlier. I heard a podcast the other day describing self-care as it's not our job to always do the self-care, but it's a community effort. And so recruiting the people and the things around you that really do restore and make sure as adults we're taking care of ourselves and we're modeling that to our children, and that it is important to take the time to utilize the resources, and to find the people that we really do kind of well us up. I think it's important to do that as individuals, as adults, and then to make sure our children know that that's available for them as well.
I think that's a good point, the self-care. So if you're a parent, how often would you try to implement or encourage your kid to do something, for themselves?
Every day, if not 12 times a day.
Yeah.
You can't pour from an empty cup. So you have to find some way to fulfill yourself and feel better, in order to actually then just be able to help others and give to others.
And that doesn't have to be, it can be like,
Massage.
yeah, something, something big that you go out and do. But, it could also be just reflecting, as a family on what it is that we're grateful for. Let's just take a minute at dinner just to acknowledge that, man, this might have been a rough day for, several of us, but I'm so grateful that we are here together right now. And, let me name 3 things that I really appreciate about you. So this idea about self-care is that what is it that really bolsters you, that grounds you, that sustains you, that connects to your deepest values, and what it is that you, what it is that you're most committed to in the world, how you want to be in the world, how you want your relationships to be, and then what are small acts every day that we can do that reflect all of that. And as much as we can communicate about that kind of stuff as families, and also just that acknowledgement that this is tricky right now, and yet here we are, and let's look at all the things that we've accomplished, and all the things that we can love and appreciate about each other and be grateful for, in spite of it all. I think it is a really powerful thing. I do think getting also back to your question about what parents can do. I think that family time, where everybody puts their, phones away, and that we're really just together and present, and appreciative of one another. There may be struggles going on, but all of us are so much more than the problems that we're having, and that we can, as family, really acknowledge that.
There's so much turmoil going on with the politics and the virus, and there's so much. How important do you think it is to eliminate the noise that's constant in your life for the kids?
Yeah, I mean, it is so hard to navigate all of that. So I believe, it's important to be a committed citizen, and I also think that, knowing yourself and what is too much. And so how can you create refuge that is connected and loving and caring and really sustaining. I mean, I think that's essential. I know I don't have a huge tolerance for watching the news, and I mean, there's I know that if I watch something at a certain point in the evening, I'm going to go to sleep, and I'm not really going to go to sleep because I'm just going to be churning. And so just knowing that and helping kids navigate that, because the kids don't have as much skill or experience in kind of how to navigate that, or it could be so overwhelming that it's really tricky. So again, in terms of really guiding our kids through these times, and just as a family, defining, what is it that we believe in and that's important to us, and how do we want to be as people in this world, and let's be that way with each other, and making that a priority.
All right, I'm done. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.